Well, first of all, we should avoid the term free trade because the agreements that are signed are not free trade agreements. They have highly protectionist elements. They're basically investor rights agreements. And they privilege investors and corporations and very high protective tariffs for major corporations. International intellectual property rights are essentially tariffs. And in many ways, and a lot of it doesn't even have to do with trade. So, for example, the so-called free trade agreements grant investors special rights in the countries where they invest. So if a U.S. company, say, invests in Mexico, they have to be treated like a Mexican company. That's got nothing to do with free trade. In fact, a lot of the interactions among countries aren't even trade in any reasonable sense. So take, say, U.S.-Mexico. Probably, corporations don't give us data, so it's guesswork. But probably about half of the commercial interactions across the border are actually internal to a multinational corporation. So, say, General Motors will assemble parts in a state, say, Indiana, and send them to northern Mexico for assembly, and then return the car to Los Angeles for sale. That's called trade in both directions, but it isn't trade. It's an interaction inside a closed economy, namely the multinational corporation. So the free trade agreements aren't free trade agreements. They're something else. And they do have complex effects. I mean, one effect often is to increase poverty. So, for example, take, say, U.S.-Mexico. The North American so-called free trade agreement was signed in 1994. It was predicted pretty widely that this would be quite harmful to Mexican farmers, small business, working people, and so on. And indeed, it has been. It's been valuable to the corporate system. It's been in Mexico. It's led to a huge growth in the number of billionaires. On the other hand, for campesinos, peasants in agricultural work, predictably it undermined them. I mean, they may be perfectly efficient, but they can't compete with highly subsidized U.S. agribusiness. It's another respect in which it's not free trade. So they flock to the cities. There's less work for them in the cities because Mexican businesses can't compete with the U.S. multinationals. They come across the border, you have what's called the immigration problem. This is the kind of effect that these neoliberal programs typically have. It leads to concentration of wealth, to high level of corruption, and to cutting back benefits for the general population and harming the workforce. So people are poorer or stagnating while wealth is accumulating in very few hands. Standard consequence, perfectly predictable, and it happens over and over, and it leads to popular uprising.